This is really a teaching about God's love and His grace, but it's illustrated by stories of vineyards, like God thinks of us as His vineyard. This teaching is based on the foundation of a revelation that I received a few years ago. In answer to the question, why does God love human beings? Or maybe I guess a better way to put that question is, how in the world can God love us flawed, foolish, perverted humans? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. God is righteous. He's fair. His judgments are perfect. And we humans are the opposite of all of those good qualities. We look around and we think that most people around us, man, they have their act together. But you know what? When we look inward, we know all too well our own flaws and sins. How can God pour out His love on someone so undeserving and unworthy? This is where the Lord took me to answer that question. Go with me to 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. 1 Corinthians 13, starting in verse 4, Paul's describing pure love here. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous, love does not brag, and it is not arrogant. Love does not act unbecomingly, it does not seek its own, it is not provoked. Love does not take into account a wrong suffered, does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. We could substitute for love, we could substitute God or Jesus in that, couldn't we? Because God is love. So we know this describes God. And there are two things in this passage that the Lord highlighted for me after asking that question. First of all, there are no conditional statements anywhere in this. As a computer programmer would say, there are no if-then-else statements. It starts with love is patient, and it doesn't say love is patient only to those who are calm or only to those who are afraid. No, God is just patient, period. To describe this, we sometimes call this God's unconditional love, meaning that there are no conditions to God's love. And then the second thing we see, and I think the first part of verse 8 confirms this, love never fails. That means that love is always love, no matter what. I think that a better word to describe God's love is not unconditional, but absolute, meaning that God's love depends only on God and is dependent or influenced by nothing else. Another way to put this is that God can't help Himself. Since God's immutable quality is being love, then God can't do anything but love us. God, by His very nature, is driven to love us absolutely. Today we're going to look at one of the ways that God thinks about us, and that is as if we were His vineyard. Now, I don't think God sees us as grapes, okay? But it's a picture that we can all relate to. You know, something out of our lived experiences, especially for Jews of the time, something that helps us understand God's absolute love. And this is an important and. This kind of illustration shows us how much it costs God emotionally to be love to we flawed, broken human beings. Yes, you heard me right. God's absolute love sometimes costs Him emotional pain. Be looking for that as we go through this teaching, okay? Before we find the scriptures of God comparing us to His vineyard, let me show you God's absolute love in the Old Testament, okay? Deuteronomy 11, 11 through 12. Deuteronomy 11, 11 through 12. But the land into which you are about to cross to possess it, a land of hills and valleys, drinks water from the rain of heaven, a land for which the Lord your God, or Yahweh your God, cares. The eyes of Yahweh your God are always on it, from the beginning even to the end of the year. God cares about the land of Israel. Isn't that interesting? The connotation is that of liking it so much you seek it out. You look around, and when you see the land, you breathe a sigh of relief. So it makes sense that God would want to put Israel on this land. This is God's favorite land, and they were his favorite people. Now, here's where God's absolute love comes in. Is Israel God's favorite because they're the most righteous? Or because they're the most pure of heart? Or the most deserving? Well, no. God chose Israel because he wanted to choose them. Go to Deuteronomy 9, 4 through 6. Deuteronomy 9, 4 through 6. Do not say in your heart, when Yahweh your God has driven them, the people of the land, out before you, don't say in your heart, because of my righteousness Yahweh has brought me in to possess this land. But it is because of the wickedness of these nations that Yahweh is dispossessing them before you. It's not for your righteousness or for your uprightness of your heart that you're going to possess this land, but it is because of the wickedness of these nations that Yahweh your God is driving them out from before you, in order to confirm the oath which Yahweh swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Know then, it is not because of your righteousness that Yahweh your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stubborn people. God hadn't given Israel his favorite land because they're worthy. Listen, the next time you feel unworthy or undeserving of God's grace, just remember this scripture. God's love for you isn't at all in any way based on your worthiness. God's not waiting for you to get right before he can use you any more than he waited for Israel to become righteous before he could use them to bring judgment on the inhabitants of Canaan. God chose you to serve Jesus because he wanted to. He loves you just the way you are because he is love, and God can't help but love you. Not loving you is not possible for God. It's not in him. So rest and relax in God's absolute love. Lord, I know that I'm the apple of your eye. What are we doing together today? Turn to Isaiah 5, 1 through 7. Isaiah 5, 1 through 7. Let me sing now for my beloved a song of my beloved concerning his vineyard. My well-beloved had a vineyard and on a fertile hill. He dug it all around, removed the stones, and planted it with the choicest vine. And he built a tower in the middle of it, and he hewed out a wine vat in it. Then he expected it to produce good fruits, good grapes, but it produced only worthless grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done for it? Why, when I expected to produce good grapes, did it produce worthless grapes? So, now, let me tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. I'll remove its hedge, and it will be consumed. I will break down its walls, and it will become trampled ground. I will lay it waste, and it will not be pruned or hoed, but briars and thorns will grow upon it. I will also charge the clouds to rain no more on it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his delightful plant. Thus he looked for justice, but only found bloodshed. He looked for righteous, but behold, a cry of distress is what he found. The house of Israel is compared to the vineyard of God. Now, is Isaiah here using a literary mechanism, trying to compose this as a minstrel, a love song? This kind of song was popular in literature at the time. The Song of Solomon is a great example of a love opera, if you will. So maybe Isaiah is doing something similar, only this love song has a tragic ending and reminds me of lots of modern love songs. Oh baby, why did you leave me? If it's country and western music, in Texas we called it crying your beer songs. Some poor man or woman lamenting a lost love. Have you ever noticed how much modern music is like that? Anyhow, this starts with the author wanting to sing a song of his well-beloved. Isaiah puts himself in the role of the minstrel composing a love song. Isaiah is referring to God as his well-beloved. Now, for the Old Testament, that seems a little personal and intimate. For we modern Spirit-filled Christians, we understand this feeling. We have a personal, intimate relationship with the Spirit of Jesus living in us. As the modern song goes, Jesus is the lover of my soul, and he deserves all my adoration, all my love, all my life. But I don't think Isaiah had that kind of relationship with God. This is strictly a literary tool to tell a story in a different way from what might be normal. My translation says that the setting of this vineyard is on a fertile hill. The literal Hebrew words paint a picture of son of fatness. In verse 2, where it says that he planted it with the choicest vine, the Hebrew word there is for a bright red grape. And then later in the verse, worthless ones is literally wild grapes. When we lived in Texas, we used to pick muscadine grapes. They had a thick skin, they were kind of bitter and sour, so you didn't just pop one in your mouth and chew it. But they did make muscadine jelly, if you put enough sugar in it anyway. They actually made a pretty good homemade wine. I suspect that these wild grapes, these worthless ones that they're talking about here, may be kind of like those Texas muscadine grapes, or maybe even worse. Verse 2 describes all the work that went into making this vineyard beautiful. When it says that a wine vat was hewn out, that means that they literally dug a pit into the rock where they could crush the grapes and then extract their juice. There was probably a trough of some kind on the side of the pit that allowed the grape juice to flow out of that basin into another container or another place where the grape juice could then be taken and fermented into wine. I actually have memories and experience with a wine press. When I was little, we lived in France. Our landlord had a big circular wooden wine press. It was about 6 feet in diameter, as I remember. They'd put a bunch of grapes in the press, and then me and local young ladies would take off our shoes and climb into the press and start stomping on the grapes. It was fun for about 5 minutes, but after that, marching in place kind of got old. Can you imagine me with purple feet? When I think of that today, I don't remember washing our feet before we got into the press. Maybe they thought the fermentation process would kill any of the germs on our feet. Well, anyhow, in verse 3 here of Isaiah 5, it becomes clear that this vineyard's Israel, and that God went to a lot of trouble to make them productive and happy. But in verse 4, we see that God's perplexed. After years of preparation and all that work, I planted the best grape seeds, nice big red ones, and when I go to harvest, all I see is worthless wild grapes. I can't make good wine out of these grapes. What am I going to do? God is so patient with us, long-suffering, forbearing. I think long-suffering and forbearing are good words to describe God's patience. His patience is just part of his absolute love. But there comes a point in loving someone where discipline and even judgment have to be brought in. Not because God has lost patience or he's become angry. No, discipline, chastising, judgment, all of those come because God loves and cares. And he just comes to the place where he can no longer stand to see the pain that's being caused by the sin, the disobedience, the dysfunction. Remember, all of God's laws and commands are for our benefit. And when we break those commands, we bring on ourselves all kinds of hurt, even curses. It breaks God's heart to see us suffering, even if our suffering is our own fault. Remember, God's empathetic. He feels everything that we feel. When we wander off the narrow path out into disobedience, it breaks his heart. And he wants to do whatever it takes to get us back on track. That's what God's doing here. You parents, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When one of your children persists in something stupid, sometimes that brings pain to them and to those around them. Well, when that happens, your heart breaks for them. You feel their pain, and it motivates you to pray for them even harder. Maybe even bring discipline. And that's what's happening here with God. So God takes action to try to reverse the destruction. You have to read verses 5 and 6 together here now to get the correct picture. Verse 6 in my translation says that God will lay waste to his vineyard. But that's not an accurate translation of the Hebrew. In Hebrew, God says that he would allow his vineyard to go to waste. How's he going to do that? Well, when we read verse 5 and 6 together, we see God's method. He's going to lift his hand to blessing, and he's going to stop his involvement. And then when God steps out of the picture, of course, nature takes its course, and the vineyard just ends up being destroyed by this broken world. There are many times, it seems to me, in the Old Testament, where it looks like God actively brings pain, but most of those times, it's really not God cursing the people. It's the people cursing themselves by their own disobedience. And God simply allows the curses to fall where they may. How many times has God protected me from my own curses? When he does that, he's being forbearing. He's being patient with me. He's hoping that I'll turn back to him quickly. But you know what? If I continue to rebel and disobey and bring pain on myself, then he lifts his hand to blessing. He allows those curses to work. And that's the whole point of God's judgment. Not to hurt us or bring us down, but to allow the consequences of our wayward actions to pressure us back into a place of obedience. God's absolute love for us costs God dearly in heartache. When we turn against him and away from him, when one person breaks off a romantic relationship, we say that person breaking off the relationship is dumping the other person, right? The other person is the one who was dumped. When your lover spurns you and dumps you, man, that really hurts, doesn't it? The dumped person might mope around for months, even years. They might even never fully recover emotionally without some kind of inner healing from the Lord. That feeling of hurt and loss is what God feels when we dump him. God's love for us is absolute. And that inevitability of his love makes it emotionally costly to God. Because our love back to God is not absolute. It's not inevitable. Listen, God's love for us is emotionally expensive to God. Should my love for others be emotionally expensive to me? Lord, teach me to be absolute love just like you are. Think about this with me for a minute. Israel isn't just one of many vineyards in the area that God likes to make wine from its grapes. No, Israel's God's own. It's his personal, special vineyard. Israel is a vineyard that he loves, a vineyard where he finds pride and peace, a vineyard that breaks his heart in disobedience. Some might say, well, Israel is God's vineyard, but that doesn't have anything to do with me. Au contraire, mon ami, as they might say in France. Israel is still God's special vineyard, but after the resurrection, we got invited into the kingdom of God, and now we are also God's special beloved vineyard. Go with me to John 15, 1 through 8. John 15, 1 through 8. We'll come back to this one, but I want to show you now another picture of God seeing us as his vineyard. Jesus says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it so that it may bear more fruit. You're already pruned because of the word which I have spoken to you. Live in me and let me live in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it lives in the vine, so neither can you unless you live in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who lives in me and I in him, he bears much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing. If anyone does not live in me, he's thrown away as a branch and dries up, and they gather them and cast them into the fire, and they're burned. If you live in me and my words live in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you may bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciple. Jesus uses this picture of a vineyard to describe our relationship with him and the Father. Do you think Jesus just meant the Jewish people who had gathered with him at the Last Supper there? How cruel would that be to write all about Jesus being the vine and we can be part of it, and yet we Christians can't be partakers of that vine? Of course we Christians are God's special, beloved vineyard. Did God expand that vineyard of Israel to include us? Or did God plant a second vineyard for Christians? We're not told for sure. But what we do know is that Israel is still God's special vineyard. The church didn't take the place of Israel in God's eyes or in his covenants. Let's look at a couple of other stories about vineyards, okay? Jesus tells these parables. Let's look at the first one, Matthew 20, 1 through 16. Matthew 20. Let's read the whole thing to start with. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. When he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius for the day, he sent them into his vineyard. He went out about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And to those he said, "You also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will pay you." And so they went. And then again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon he did the same thing. And again at about 5 in the afternoon he went out and he found others standing around. And he said to them, "Why are you standing around idle all day long?" And they said, "Well, because nobody's hired us." And he said to them, "Go into the vineyard too." When the evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the laborers and pay them each their wages, beginning with the last to the first." When those hired about the 11th hour came, each one received a denarius. That was the amount that you'd normally pay for a full day's wages. When those hired first came, they thought, man, they're going to get a lot more. But they also received a denarius. When they received it, they grumbled at the landowner, saying, "These last men have worked only 1 hour, and you make them equal to us, who have borne the burden and the scorching heat of the day?" But he answered and said to them, "Friend, am I doing you any wrong? Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what's yours and go. But I wish to give to this last man the same as you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own? Or is your eye envious because I'm generous? So the last shall be first, and the first shall be last." The generous employer. This is a familiar parable. We've all heard many times, but I want to give you some cultural background to this story so you can understand it the way the people listening at the time understood it. The parable begins talking about the landowner hiring day laborers. Every place I've lived, there's a place, it's a parking lot or a street corner, where early in the morning, people that are desperate for a day's work, they'll hang out there. And these people are literally living paycheck to paycheck. And each paycheck comes at the end of that day. The people in a pickup will drive by these areas. They'll pick out a few people for some work. And the guys hop in the back of the pickup and they head off to work. The workers that look the best are picked first. Usually by 9 in the morning, that place is empty. Or there may be a couple of guys standing around hoping for work. But these are the desperate ones, the ones that are saying, man, I can't go home to my wife and family and tell them that another day has gone by and I don't have any money. If there's anybody there at 4 in the afternoon, then they've come back from one job hoping for a second, or man, they are desperate for work. Well, at this particular place, there were at least a couple of folks there right up until the end of the day. And those couple of guys that they hired, man, they had to be really desperate. Even if I only work for an hour and get paid for an hour, at least I know that my family has something today. Did you know that these kinds of scenes play out in Israel today? Usually the ones looking for work in the parking lot are Palestinians, and the people driving the pickup trucks are Israelis. Here's another something else that people of the day would have found strange. He says that the landowner himself goes out to hire people. Well, normally that's the job of a manager, supervisor of some kind. Verse 8 refers to the vineyard foreman. Well, that's the guy that normally does the hiring. Why is the landowner doing the recruiting? He's not some kind of aloof rich guy living in a big downtown penthouse. This guy really cares about this vineyard, and he does it enough to get his hands dirty and help make it a success. It sounds like they might be really short-handed. Maybe the harvest was better than they expected, or they're pruning the vines or something. I don't know. Here in the U.S., you can usually trust people. But in this area at the time of Jesus, the land was full of scammers and robbers. So the workers hired later in the day, they might be leery about how much they're going to get paid. In verse 4, the landowner says that he's going to pay them what's right and fair. They were either so desperate for work that they'd take anything, or maybe this landowner was well known in the community. Maybe he had a good reputation for being compassionate and fair. That's the reputation I want to be known for in my community. Well, one last little question. How come he didn't hire enough people at the beginning of the day? Was he not a very good planner? Or maybe he didn't know what was needed? Was he new, inexperienced at this? Do you know what I think? I think he had a heart of compassion for these day laborers. They live such a hard, uncertain life. I could just give them money, but that would take away their dignity. But if I hire them and pay them generously, they still feel good about doing some honest work, and they get to take home a good paycheck tomorrow. In businesses that I've owned or run, I've done this. I don't know how many people I've hired to give them a chance. And sometimes they pay off, and sometimes it didn't pay off. Man, could I ever tell you some stories. Getting people out of halfway houses, jail. Well, anyway, I think Jesus crafted this story in a way to show something different from what the locals were used to. They were used to ruthless landowners who worked through managers to exact the maximum amount of work for the lowest possible wage. They were used to employers who weren't right, they weren't fair. Jesus crafted this parable as a contrast to what they saw in their time. Jesus wanted to show a vineyard owner who loved his vineyard. He loved it enough to be personally involved in its day-to-day operations. This is a man who cares about the local day workers. This would be the ones ranked the lowest in their society, and yet he wants to give them something they didn't earn or deserve. He wants to be there when they receive their wages, so he can see the joy in their faces when they receive more than they expected. Isn't this just like God, our compassionate Creator? He sees our desperate plight, and he knows that we're helpless to help ourselves. If the vineyard owner doesn't hire me, man, I have no hope. God is laboring all day in the heat to find those few who are willing to come into his kingdom. And the grace he pours out on us is unearned, it's undeserved. The grace of being set free from sin, and the graces of all the blessings that he pours out on us. And he loves to hand out his grace in an up-close and personal way. He wants to see the joy in our faces when we realize how much we're loved and blessed. In God's economy of grace, we all receive the same grace, whether we served God all our long lives or just served God for a few minutes of our lives. To him, it all counts the same. How amazing! To me, this story is a way to illustrate the heart of God. But I think there's more to it than just that. I think this also reminds us that Jesus came for the Jews and the Gentiles. The ones who are hired first seem to represent the Jews. The ones hired later in the day are the Gentiles who are brought in. The last ones hired, I think, represent those who live for the devil all their lives, and then at the last minute they give their heart to Jesus. I've known a couple of men like that. Man, they lived all their lives serving the devil just as hard as they could. But as they approached their last days, God was able to get hold of their hearts, able to woo them. They gave their hearts to Jesus, and they were truly converted. And I am sure they are now spending eternity with our Lord. Well, let's stop here in the middle of this parable. I want to get to the last verse where Jesus says that the last will be first. I think there's an important life lesson for us in what Jesus said there. And anyway, then we'll look at some more vineyard parable stuff.